Good evening, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. And welcome to the Newark Museum of Art's Museum Crawl, Passport to Tokyo. I'm Tricia Laughlin-Bloom. I'm the curator of American art at the Newark Museum of Art. And for tonight's program, we are traveling to Tokyo to visit our friends at the Hayama Residency, who've been spending the last month in Tokyo making art and mounting a show and exploring the city. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Hayama Residency, I want to tell you a little bit about the program, which supports contemporary artists and which the Newark Museum of Art is also proud to support. The mission of the Hayama Residency is to introduce visual artists from around the world to Japanese culture, and offer them an opportunity to have their first gallery exhibition in Japan. Artists who apply are accepted into the program, spend 4 weeks in residency in Hayama, a coastal city about 1 hour south of Tokyo. So tonight we're speaking with Dexter Wimberly, the founder and director of the Hayama Residency, and very exciting, the inaugural Hayama Artists in Residence, Lynn Myers and Nadia Estela. So Dexter is going to lead the conversation. And just before we get started, I want to remind everybody that if you have questions for the group, for the artists, for Dexter, to go ahead and put them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, if you're familiar with that format, and we'll get to it just as many as we can. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome these wonderful people, join them in the gallery in Tokyo, and please take it away, Dexter.
Good. Thanks so much, Trish. I hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. I'm extremely happy to be here with Lynn Myers and Nadia Liz Estela. You guys may notice that there's a secondary screen here. What we're trying to do, given how strange Zoom is, to give you a bit of a sense of the space that we're in. As Tricia mentioned, we are currently in Tokyo, Japan. So I don't know where everyone else is in the world, but it's about 8:03 in the morning here. So we've been up for quite some time getting prepared for this. So Lynn and Nadia have been in Japan for about a month. They leave tomorrow. They both arrived, around the 1st of June. Lynn got in a couple of days after that, but they've had the opportunity to spend time in Hayama, travel around different parts of Japan, and of course have this exhibition here at Koki Arts in Tokyo. The exhibition is titled Light as a Feather. It's on view until July 2nd, but of course works can be seen online, for quite some time after that. I'm really humbled and honored to be having this conversation today, because 2 years ago, when the idea of this residency, sort of started to take root, I had no idea if this was actually going to work. And to have two artists travel all the way from, at this point, the United States to be here is quite a dream come true for me. I'm just going to read a couple of sentences of each artist's bio. I think it's sort of like always weird to hear your own bio, so I'm not going to read too much, just a couple of sentences for those who are not familiar. Nadia Liz Estela is an interdisciplinary artist born in the Dominican Republic and raised in Newark, New Jersey. Go Jersey. Estela's work examines how identity is constructed through migration and memory. Her mixed media pieces, which often incorporate textile and sculptural elements, references to different layers of migration, including uncovering that which is often invisible. She keenly explores the aspects of life and society, its norms, morals, and indoctrinated labels that we know exist but do not acknowledge. Lynn Myers is an American artist based in Washington, D.C. Her paintings, drawings, and site-specific work use repetitive applications of line and color, hand-drawn on a variety of surfaces, including paper, vellum, mylar, and gallery walls. Each piece begins with a single mark, a line that traces a predetermined framework of circles, or a simple singular gesture. The first stroke defines the direction in which the entire image will evolve. Each line, a direct response to the mark made just before. So I said all of that. Now people are probably like, what does that mean? So first of all, I want to start off by giving each of you an opportunity to just share anything you'd like to say about how you're feeling today. Say hello to people. I know some of your friends are probably here today, or they're going to watch this as it streams after this. So I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but you are on the spot today. So I'm going to start with you, Lynn. Just say hello and introduce yourself.
So thank you all for joining us, and thank you so much to Dexter. This has just been an incredible experience being in Japan for a month. It's such a rare opportunity to not only experience a very foreign culture in a deeper way than one can when one just travels for a week or two, but also to shift gears in terms of our production. Because I feel like at home, we're all in our tracks. And when you get out of your tracks, new and magical things happen. And it's not always easy, but when you really open yourself up to embrace that, I think you can stumble upon territory that wouldn't be available to you otherwise. So thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
And thank you to the Newark Museum for hosting us today.
Absolutely.
Well, I think basically piggyback on that, just thank you to Dexter for thinking of bringing both artists here to such a magical place. I think that is the ongoing word that keeps reappearing over and over again. Thank you to the Newark Art Museum for hosting us today. And truly, I think that this experience as artists, it really challenges us to seek and to really push our way of thinking, our way of making. So I'm extremely grateful, and thank you, Dexter.
Well, thank you both. We're here in Tokyo, but we've seen a lot. I'm in Japan, like I'm permanently here, and I've experienced things in the past 30 days, seen things, places that I had only dreamed of seeing. So I can only imagine what that has been like for you two. I'm also quite surprised there are already a bunch of questions in the chat. So, okay, here we go. There's a lot there. I've prepared a slide presentation today with images of both of your work, and also you provided me with images of some of the places and things that you've seen while here in Japan. And since folks are joining us, likely who are not in Japan, I want to go ahead and get started with Nadia's presentation, and then Lynn will come back. And we'll go through Lynn's presentation, and then we'll also answer some questions along the way. So again, as mentioned, if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. We're going to get started with Nadia's presentation. You can see my screen, and I'm sure you can. So Nadia, we're in Koki Arts Gallery now, and I know that folks can't really get a 360-degree view of the space, unfortunately, just the technical limitations of Zoom and the fact that I'm not a film producer. So I've kind of like set this up the best way that I can. So we have some images of your work. So why don't I just kind of get to the first image of your work that's in this slide presentation, so we can show folks some of what you do. So this is actually on the wall behind us. So that's a bit like kind of matrixy, because it's here and it's there at the same time. So let's get started. Let's talk about this work here.
Okay, well, this piece actually came to be, it took me about 6 months to complete. As I was thinking at the time, I was reading Glissant's Poetics of Relation and really looking at rhizome. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's essentially thinking about growing horizontally, vertically instead of horizontally. What happens to a community? What happens to the self if you envision growing outside of yourself in a vertical way? And so at that time, part of my practice is definitely thinking about materiality and the way that I can push materials. So I actually encased yucca, which is cassava,
Mm.
and I dried it in resin and used it as a stamp to create these very specific marks onto the paper. So even the process of drying the cassava, waiting for it to kind of all the water to kind of be removed from the plant, and then preserving it and then stamping it onto the paper for it to create its own sort of memory.
Mhm.
Then after that happened, I went in with watercolor, with ink, actually with acrylic ink, and really wanted to create this idea of watercolors. Even though I am using ink, the effect that this kind of ghost-like and impermanence
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
happens
Mhm.
in watercolor, I wanted to kind of translate that. And I always kind of bring this idea of textiles into the work. So in the on the right-hand side, the paper is pierced. This idea of piercing, but piercing also being used as a way of mending, that is also incorporated into the piece.
Mhm.
And at the same time, thinking about this whole body of work has kind of come, this was the first piece that actually came from this whole body of work, and the idea of sustenance and the importance of the natural world and plants and how they, in our relationship with them.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm going to move to the next image, but I also want to say something about that work that we just saw in your work in general. You know, and thinking about artists for the residency, because I'm sure there are a lot of questions that people have, like, what are you looking for? Like, what's the criteria? Like, how does someone get selected? And, you know, it is a very complicated process because there are a lot of, you know, opinions and it's a selection committee. And of course, I'm very involved. But, you know, your work stood out to me as work that felt very grounded and connected in nature. And also the fact that you often work on paper gave me the sense that an experience in Japan, especially in Hayama and the surrounding towns, would give you an opportunity to connect with nature in a way that perhaps you haven't in a long time.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And so, you know, some of the thinking around your being selected for the residency wasn't just on the strength of the work that you had created, it was also thinking about the work that you may create as a result of the experience. Just to give you a little insight, because I hadn't actually told you that. So we can move on to the next work.
Again, so this piece actually is one of three, and the two, this is milkweed, then the other one is sancocho, and the other one is ginger. And I actually, those three pieces have to do with native plants that are used for homeopathic kind of purposes. But specifically, I was reading elements of color, and green tends to be a very, very difficult color to work with, and often when you're doing color theory in whether it's undergrad or wherever, it's always a color that's kind of like not like, because it could either muddy your painting, or it could make it too cold, or so it's always a color that's kind of like it's hard to work with. So I use these paintings as a way to really push and challenge myself with the color green.
Right.
And because those three paintings specifically, they're three different greens. So you have the young green, this almost yellow green, that is the ginger that you see in spring, then that you can't, when things start to kind of come alive, you start to see, and it's not yellow, but it's not green. It's like this in between. And then there's the next piece that is kind of that vibrant green. And then this third piece, the one that we're looking at, is this mature green, the mature green that you tend to see like in August.
I remember you mentioning that. We were walking in, I believe, Naoshima, may have been Naoshima, been a lot of places. Could have been Kyoto. I'm not bragging, but we've been to a lot of places.
It was Naoshima.
And I remember you mentioning that you like, oh, you can see the young green and the mature green. And then I hadn't actually thought of it in that way. I often would just think about it in terms of it being different types of plants, as opposed to it being different ages and periods in their cycle of growth. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So we have the third work here.
Yeah, so this body of work is kind of, I still try to figure it out, actually. It's a little bit, there are 4 pieces, because I tend to work in series. And this actually happened right as the pandemic started. So I wasn't in I had my home studio, and I had to basically use the space. So these are slightly smaller. And I was about fruits, and this is passion fruit. I was thinking about the Caribbean, I was thinking about consumption, but I was actually also thinking about like space and time. And so there's this idea of them floating. So yeah, that's these pieces.
It's interesting you should say that. I think that sometime in the future, archaeologists or anthropologists or whoever is around, hopefully people are around, are going to look back on the art made in the second half of 2020 and the first half of 2021, and there's going to be a clear delineation of scale. Like there'll be a bunch of artworks in that period that have just all really small, and they'll go, why are all of these thousands of works in that period of time so small from all these different artists across the world? And it'll be because people were working in their kitchen, right? Like people were working in their bedroom. Like you know, not everyone was going to go and travel, whatever. Anyway, I don't want to digress too much, but I think that's like a interesting thing. So this is the final work from you that we'll show. But after this, we're actually going to go into some images of Japan.
Yeah. So this kind of the work that you saw before, then my work kind of shrunk even more. And because it was kind of pushing me with scale. And to work small is actually harder a lot of times, because every detail is very precious. You can't help, So these pieces, again, I was thinking of the rhizome and plants that kind of grow out of themselves. Here you have ginger, you have turmeric, you have, I think, galagal, which is the type of lotus flower, and the sugar cane. But at the same time, within these plants, I also was looking at African artifacts from whether Ghana, whether different tribes in the continent of Africa, and how these artifacts have been collected or stolen or have ended up in certain institutions or at certain collections, and this idea of value and how value quantification and so it's something that I'm currently exploring. And at the same, so with that being said, this word Iwa has come up over and over again. It's a Yoruba word, but it actually works. It has a dual meaning, which is either knife or beauty.
I see.
So there's this ongoing word that's kind of in the language of the work right now that I'm currently exploring.
Fantastic. So let's go into looking at some of the images that you've captured during your time here. I think that's like highly anticipated. And we're going to go through these. We're not going to go through them incredibly fast, but we're going to get through these in about 10 minutes or maybe less. So okay, great. So let's begin here.
So this is Hayama. This is Hayama. This is like, I got here to Japan completely jet lagged for like 10 days. 2 blocks away from this. When you're coming from Jersey and from, New York, where everything is super stimulating at all times, then you basically have to rewire your brain to have a different form of stimulation. Because this was just as overwhelming, I think, as if standing in Times Square, in just a different way. Because your own thoughts at times can be just as maddening when you are a maker. And to really have to slow down, your body also is like, what time is it? I'm waking up at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. And, and it was, I think the sky also in this particular picture, it just went on. It was finite, like it just kept infinite, like it just kept going, and I think it was a perfect welcoming.
It's interesting you should say that about like that time where you got to like quiet your mind. I jokingly said to my wife Kanako the other day, I said, a lot of folks think they need a vacation from like their family or vacation from where they live, but what they actually need is a vacation for themselves.
Yeah.
Because that first few days when you do find silence, you do have that precious time alone, you still have all the noise. All the echoes, all the noise of everything that you've been dealing with. And it takes a little bit of time, different for different people, to actually get to a place of silence or quiet.
Well, in this time, being here at different, it really, if anything that I've taken away from this experience is really adopting a walking practice. And using a walking practice, like I would wake up every day and just start walking. The town was just so beautiful and quiet, and there was a lot of rain, and there was something kind of mystical about being in this beautiful island that was very misty, so it kind of appeared like a dream sometimes, because it had like this filter, this like natural filter.
Right.
You know how we go on social media, it had this, the environment had this natural filter to it that and every time I would end up at the water, which water has really come up a lot lately as well.
Yeah. So this is an image on the left. I believe that is an image in Hayama.
Yes. Yeah.
And on the right, of course, is the ocean. And here's another image of the ocean. Why these particular images? Well, I know I asked you guys the impossible. I said, hey, I know you've taken like 700 photos since you've been here. Can you give me 6?
Yeah, I know. I think these images have to do with, well, something that we kind of talked about when we were in Teoshima was how water always finds a way. And I found in this, I'm definitely still digesting the experience, but water always finds a way of finding it back to itself, or back into its, whether it is its community, it's larger, you see how So one of the images that I didn't put throughout Hayama, you have these like exit routes for in case of a tsunami, right?
Right.
And there's like the image of that. I'm like, nature will always be more powerful. There's in specifically water there's a power to water.
Right.
There is a rhythm to water. There's a balance to water. There's a line to it that is has been echoed over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, water is such a big part of the experience of not only Hayama, but Japan in general, of course, you know, fishing and other industries that sort of blossom as a result of the proximity to the sea. But it's as dangerous as the ocean can be during earthquakes, which are not uncommon here. I've experienced about 4 earthquakes since I've been living here. They're not uncommon. You guys have been, you know, spared. You still got 12 hours, you never know.
Oh, please.
But water can be dangerous, but it's so vital.
Yeah.
The sea is so vital that even given its potential dangers, that's where we all need to be, right? So I'm not sure, I think I know where these images are, but you can talk about what's there now.
So this was literally my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
So every morning I would wake up. There were days I was up at like 5 in the morning and I'm like twiddling my fingers. I'm like, what, you know, like the day started, you know? So by 7 a.m., there's this beautiful trail. So this is another thing, the juxtaposition of landscape. Mm. So this beautiful trail, this kind of tropical kind of bamboo forest you see on the right-hand side, then you keep walking, it goes up to 130, I think, meters above sea level. Mm-hmm. And as you keep going up, the landscape also changes. It goes from a bamboo forest into a more kind of, I guess there's more humidity up there. And this kind of like lush portals that you would walk through, and then at the other side of the hill, you would literally end up at the ocean, where the landscape would then transform once again.
Right. It's fantastic.
And this is just walking through. You know, we take for granted, I think, the beauty, right? There's in all the different textures in it, whether the linear, the bulbous, the kind of spontaneous. Mm-hmm. And there is no better architect than nature. That's that I was just like,
absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And that's part of sort of like my connection to Japan. So I won't go on too long in the interest of time, but I'm sure there's also a lot of curiosity that people have, like, why on earth would, you know, like pick up in Japan. I've always felt this sort of like connection to nature that was unmet where I've been living in, originally from Brooklyn, and then, you know.
I mean, everywhere here. Yeah. I mean, even here in Tokyo, you walk through, even as busy of a city as it is, every nook and cranny, there is a moment and opportunity for nature that people actually nurture and also cater to create, like whether it is this trellis over parking lots, or in the most beautiful, like weeds are just growing in the corner of you know, by a bicycle stand. Every single moment is a moment to kind of, and this photograph, this slide, one of the things that I have really, Japan is extremely a symmetrical culture. What I mean by that is, whether it's through the Buddhist traditions that I have been exposed to here, but everything has a sort of symmetry, beautiful symmetry. This idea of balance. Every moment that you walk through here, there's some sort of balance in textures, in layers, just I mean, at all times, and there, I mean, everything has, I don't know how
No, I mean, no, it's funny because all four of these images, I mean, obviously these are sort of like random places, so I can't say for sure.
So
Like,
the one
of-
on the
yeah.
left is a pathway, like going up, like a hill towards the hiking trail.
Mhm.
The next one is a sidewalk. The
Mhm.
third one is a roof tile. And then the last one are these like boulders that are against the seawall.
Right.
And everything is just so beautiful. Yeah.
And I think this is the final image, and this is Kyoto. Yes?
This is Kyoto. So going back, this idea of symmetry and also nurturing nature at every opportunity. One of the things that I saw in Kyoto, but just about everywhere, the entrances of the homes were just so methodically, both, it's almost like the like ikebana, which is like creating it's the flowering arrangements here in Japan, in which they are not trying to create an arrangement, but rather create a natural environment.
Right.
And this, but at this, it mimics both symmetry and the spontaneous.
Right.
So which you see here as well, which you find symmetry and balance in nature, but then you have this kind of sporadic moment, whether it is the bamboo or whether it is the leaf. It's just been such an otherworldly experience for me. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Nadia. So I'm going to ask Lynn Myers to come and join us. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing and just so that folks can, see you're back here. So Lynn, so we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to look at some of your work and talk a bit about it, and then we're going to show some of the images that you've captured during your time here in Japan. I hope that my screen go with a leap of faith that it is. Sorry for the traffic in the background, but this is Zoom, uncut, unfiltered. Great. So let's go ahead and start with looking at a few images of your work.
So the work that's in this exhibition is, it's all work that I've made during the pandemic. And in general, I could say I work on a large scale. So large paintings, maybe, over 6 feet tall, and also large installation projects. So site-specific wall drawings that, are anywhere from 20 feet to 400 feet. But the work in this exhibition is in the range of 7 by 9 to I think just about 41 inches,
right.
So all much smaller. And these pieces were started when the quarantine began and our lives were all turned upside down. The piece that's on the screen right now is actually one of the most recent pieces. By 14 inches, but I actually worked on that for a couple of years. So there are many paintings within that painting. And one thing I could say about all of my work is that I don't plan things out ahead of time.
Really?
Yeah, none
so
of it is
that is kind of surprising to hear, considering what feels like a certain amount of precision. It's amazing to hear that that is not mapping and planning everything out from start to finish.
There's zero mapping. Yeah. I mean, when you read the bio, I realized that part the idea of beginning with a matrix of geometry, I think that was mentioned in the bio,
right.
that applies to the site-specific works, but not generally to the paintings that I make. So this piece also, this is a little bit bigger, it's 20 by 16, I think. It is part of this new body of work that I made when I felt that the world was too unstable to dig into a larger painting. So the large paintings that I make generally take about 3 months, and I work on one piece at a time. So it takes a different kind of focus. And when things feel topsy-turvy, it can be difficult to put all of my energy into one place. So with the smaller works, it allowed me to kind of move about in the studio.
Right.
And like the piece that we just looked at, you know, I said it took a couple of years, so I wasn't working on that piece alone for a couple of years, obviously.
Of course.
That was like, I would work on it and then kick it to the back and then
Right.
work on something else. And so this is a way that I managed to kind of get through the darkest hours of the pandemic.
And so this is quite different than the prior two pieces that we just looked at, but made fairly recently.
Yes. In fact, this may be my most recent painting in the show. I think it is the most recent painting in the show. And you can sort of see the patina there. So unlike that first piece that you showed, the really dark one, where all of the other paintings that are supporting that final image are buried, in this piece, you can sort of see the residue of earlier images. And this painting was a finished painting that I even had photographed and documented, and then sanded it down. And I wouldn't say started over, because there was already, I left some of the marks that had been from the earlier piece, but developed it into something new and different.
Fantastic. So this is the final work of yours we'll look at today, and then we're going to go into looking at some of the images that you've captured during your time here in Japan. And so this piece that's on the screen now, it's actually not hung in the show because it was the only work that you said specifically it is not for sale. So I was kind of curious to understand, like, why is this particular piece so meaningful to you? And I'm sure your other works are meaningful to you, but maybe you can just explain your relationship to this particular work.
Yeah, so, well, in the first piece that you showed, there was that sphere, that spherical element in the center. And that's something that has repeated itself over the past couple of years. But this piece, that central element, which I think of as an envelope, that was the first time in a long time where I had used imagery that was semi-recognizable from our physical world in one of my paintings. You know, kind of intentionally creating illusion. Right. Because there is a lot of illusion in my work, but most of it occurs organically. Right. And in this piece, I actually folded a piece of paper and made that's actually in the center. There is colored pencil and paint. So I actually made an image that was intended to look like this folded piece of paper. And I think of it, my private title for it is my secret letter. And I don't know what the secret letter says, but it somehow holds a lot of the experiences that I was having at that time. This painting, I made this right after I moved my studio at the beginning of the pandemic. This panel had been buried at the back of a closet in my old studio. I had completely forgotten about it. I'd started a painting and then abandoned it. Right. When I moved and unpacked all of my boxes, I remembered this and started working on it. And so I think that's why it's so important to me, because it represents this very, very particular moment in time that all of us were experiencing, but in very different ways.
I understand. Thank you for sharing that. Let's look at some of the images from your time in Hayama and other places. So if you can just quickly walk us through why you selected these images to sort of be indicative of the memories of being here in Japan and the things you've experienced.
Well, I loved hearing Nadia talk about her experience here, and I feel like she covered a lot of the territory that is on my mind as well. At home in Washington, D.C., I walk to my studio every day, and my walk is through Rock Creek Park, through the woods, and that's a really important part of my daily practice. So when I'm removed from that situation where the walking part of my practice is also serves a purpose, it's my commute to the studio. When I'm removed from that, I have to be more intentional about building that into my day.
Right.
And Nadia introduced me to this small mountain behind our apartment that, as she mentioned, leads, once you summit and come down on the other side, you find yourself at the ocean. And so that was where I spent a lot of my time, as well as on the shore. This photograph was taken when we had a full moon in the beginning of our residency, and the tide was very far out for a number of days. And so I spent a fair amount of time kind of poking around on in the tide pools. And this, also at the beginning of the residency, when we had a certain kind of weather that Nadia was talking about, almost feeling like a filter. I was really struck by the patterns on the sand and the stillness of the space there. It's interesting because the first part of our residency, the sea was so still. And I having never been to Hayama before, I thought, oh, that's just how it is. And then the last few days there, it wasn't still at all.
No, it was really choppy the other day. I just saw it was almost like a storm hadn't come through, but it almost like storm waves, right?
Yeah,
Very, very, it changes a lot. It changes a lot.
Yeah, so weather is a big part of what I kind of think about as I'm making my commute ordinarily, and because the weather here was so visible to me,
Right.
not being in the forest the whole time, but being out and about, I feel like that really had an impact on my experience. This was taken at one of many I just happened upon, and I was really struck by the tree at the top of the space there. But one of the things that I loved about my walks through Hayama was just happening upon these seemingly secret, sacred spaces tucked away. I mean, this looks like it would be kind of a destination, but in fact, it's hidden behind a bunch of homes, and it's really just kind of an everyday occurrence, I suppose, for people who live in Hayama, but for a foreigner, it appears very special.
What's interesting about this image, and it was, wasn't surprising that this would make it into one of your, the two of your selection of images, is that, these cemeteries are they're very common. And unlike my experience in the United States, I've visited very few cemeteries in the United States, thankfully, is that you don't have to change your entire plans for the day to go visit your ancestors.
Right. Right.
Because the cemeteries are not centralized, they're decentralized. If you decide you want to, say, intern your great-grandparents or grandparents' remains nearby, that means you can have a relationship with them that, and again, this isn't so much about religion as it is about just wanting to stay connected to those who you love. And you can sometimes do that just by going 10 minutes, 15 minutes, as opposed to like in New York City, it's like, oh, well, that means you're going to be traveling to another borough, or you're going to, it's a whole big complicated thing. And I think that that's also connected to what it means to live here and the culture, that there are different ways of staying connected to nature, staying connected to your ancestors, different way of consuming food, consuming art, and all of these things. And we're here in Tokyo, which is like very different than Hayama in many, many ways, but you can also still feel that here, even though it is a massive city.
These three images were just, I chose these because they sort of illustrate this commitment to order that I found here. And of course, there's always outliers.
Right,
But,
right.
But, you know, more times than not, the gardens, the yards, the piles of garbage, the tools, everything has order to it. Even the way that those, I'm assuming there's some kind of like concrete water main sections in the center there. Even the way those were set down in this parking lot prior to whatever construction they're going to be doing, they're set down evenly and in an ordered fashion.
Right.
And that the picture is not, it's not like I cropped out the part that was jumbled.
Right.
That's just how things are here.
Right. Very sculptural.
Yeah.
Like even if I told you that was intentional, that was meant to be an installation, you'd be like, yeah, okay, I get it.
Yeah, exactly. And the garden on the left there is exemplary of what happens when you peek into little alleyways and doorways. You
Right.
just find magic everywhere. It's really extraordinary.
Yeah, that attention to detail is something that has always struck me as such a big part of being here, and being able to see the beauty in the small things, really, really small things. Speaking of small things.
Yes, yes. So that was from the same day that the photograph where the tide was way out. I went into the tidal pools and just collected some things.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, yeah. And when I saw this photo before you shared it with me for this presentation, and I was just really struck by, you know, the fact you bring all of these objects together and they just become a work of art, you know, like this
Something
is
else.
fantastic,
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah. And both of these pictures are from our trip to Kyoto, with the bamboo forest and the gates. And we were very fortunate to be there when, well, tourism hasn't fully reopened here in Japan. And also it was rainy for the 2 days that we were there, especially the first day when we visited the gates.
Right.
And so it was virtually empty, and which I think doesn't really happen during ordinary tourist seasons.
Rarely, yeah.
And those gates, for those of you listening who have never visited Kyoto, those gates go all the way up this hill. We climbed them. I don't think we went to the very top.
We did not, but it still took us, we were up there for a long time.
Yeah.
Certainly more than an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's just something about walking through this evenly spaced, continuous pathway where you have the same feature repeated over and over again. And I think that's another quality of design here in Japan, is just this repetition. So the bamboo forest was an interesting way of seeing that in nature the following day.
Absolutely. And I think this is your final image.
Yes. So this was the next, this is the day after our time in Kyoto. We took a train down to further down to the coast to visit Naoshima, Tashima. And so this was taken from the train, obviously at sunset, of the rice fields, just in a residential area. And I found it so beautiful.
Right, and it's funny, I'm gonna stop share here. It's funny because I think that it's very easy for people to take these types of experiences and images for granted when you live there. And it's the same thing being in any city like Washington, DC, or Newark, or New York, or Detroit, or anywhere. You get used to your environment.
Absolutely.
And then it takes others coming into it to show you the beauty of the thing that you've just kind of grown so accustomed to. You no longer understand just like how, to use that word again, how magical it is. Nadia, I'm going to ask you to join us again. I'm going to try to scan these questions that have come in and see if we can just answer a couple of them. So I'm going to just jump to this one. It's out of order, but I'll jump to it and I'll get to the ones prior. As a non-native Japanese artist, how has your work been informed by the differences in culture, space, and time? What would be your big takeaways from this residency? So I'm going to give you each like 30 seconds to answer that. As a non-native Japanese artist, how's your work been informed by the differences in culture, space, and time? And what would your biggest takeaway be from being in the residency?
I think the idea of meditation through order. Something that is seeing, whether it is in nature or in the architecture. Looking at Lynn's photos, it reminded me of Kyoto, and what I thought indicates in this idea of repetition, walking through it was almost this form of meditation as you walk through the space, because everything is kind of repeated. So I think that was my biggest takeaway as a non-Japanese person, this looking at repetition as a way of having an introspective kind of relationship with the space.
Yeah. That's definitely some of it for me as well. I would add to that, and this is something that we've talked about, and one thing that we haven't addressed in this conversation at all is our relationship, which is kind of incredible.
Somehow Dexter has like posted all these photos of us cracking up. It has been like that the whole time, because I think just being out of our own space and finding someone to click that we just clicked. It was amazing, and we've bonded in ways that I don't know if otherwise ever happened.
Yeah, well, when you're like, so that relates to what I was going to say, is that you're plopped down in a place that's so totally foreign, and it really is like, I mean, you can't read the signage most of the time because the alphabet's different.
Right.
And most people don't speak English.
Right.
And you find yourself trying to use Google Translate, and I don't know what Google Translate is translating, but it's not always accurate. And what it made me think a lot about is taking that experience home with me and trying to use that lens at home, because I think it's really informative. It's like we can see all of these things, repetition, pattern, nature, with fresh eyes, because because this is new to us, it's new territory. But I think that there's just as much of that at home that we miss, as you were mentioning. And so to try and like bring that back with me is what I would like to do.
No, that's a fantastic takeaway. So someone asked the spelling of Nadia's name. So it's NadiaLizestela. I'm sure also if you go to Newark Museum's website, you'll see the announcement for this. You can get that again. Another question that came in is, with the exhibit of the artist's work in Japan, is that work that the artist did before the residency or work during or after the residency? So I'll just answer that quickly. All of the work in the exhibition was work that was created before the residency, because one of the reasons for that is that I did not want to have artists come to Japan and have to then figure out, in a place they've never visited before, or even if they visited it before, to have to figure out how they're going to create a studio situation when they're only here for about 4 weeks. I mean, it goes by quickly. I mean, you guys have been here for 4 weeks, and I feel like just now in the past couple of weeks, you've kind of you've probably gotten your feet completely underneath you, and now it's time to go.
Yeah.
So making work while here wasn't something that was mandatory. Artists gonna be artists, so
we figured it out.
Lynn and Nadia were making work, in the apartment, that they were staying in while they were here. Obviously, probably smaller work given the space limitations. So that answers that question. Someone also asked a more general question. They said, "This is awesome. One of the questions I have is, how can art bring communities together globally?" Well, I think this is an example of it. I didn't know Lynn or Nadia prior to this residency. And certainly the folks here in Japan hadn't met them before either. So this was an opportunity to bring art and artists together. So I think that is one example. The reason I started the residency was not just the idea of like bringing artists to Japan for them to experience Japanese culture, but also to expose Japanese people that are not Japanese. And it's that sort of back and forth world trade thing that I'm very interested in and trying to be a catalyst for. Let me scroll to the bottom to make sure I'm not leaving anyone's questions out. A lot of praise here, amazing photos, great symmetry. Thank you guys, thank you, thank you, thank you. Terrific composition of photos, I agree. Photos are divine, they certainly are. Someone mentioned something about yuca, Nadia. They said yuca is a big part of Dominican culture and African diaspora, so I love this take. So referencing your use of that vegetable.
It's a root.
Root vegetable.
Vegetable,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like an idiot. I figured
Well,
it
it's
was
a starch.
like, I know
Yes.
it's, I was like, I want to make sure it is a vegetable. And so, do you have plans to bring Japanese artists to Newark? Great question. Well, that's a question that I will be asking the Newark Museum. If there's a possibility of doing something interesting collaboratively around that, I would love to. Will the Newark Museum of Art, Nadia and Lynn, for further cultural and artistic discussion? So they had done some things with the museum in the past, but that was like height of pandemic. So I'm not doing anybody's job for them or making decisions for other people, but it would be great if there was another program with Nadia and Lynn in person at New York Museum of Art when people feel comfortable all being together in a space. So we will try to make that happen. We're getting close to the end of time. I just want to make sure I'm not leaving anyone else's question out before we get to sort of like a closing here. But I think we've made it through the questions. I want to give you, Lynn and Nadia, a quick opportunity to tell people how they can find out more about you, how they can find you on social media, websites, what have you. So we'll start with Nadia.
Well, you can find me on my website, nadializestela.com. And my Instagram is ESTELANA, so Estela NA. That's my handle. And yeah, thank you
Great.
so much.
And
My name is spelled LINNMEYERS. And my website is just linnmyers.com. And my Instagram is also @Lynn Myers. So pretty easy.
so I'd encourage you guys to follow them. If they have mailing lists on their site, sign up for them so you can stay up to speed and abreast of what they have going on. Hayama Artists Residency, the 2023 application just opened. So hayamaresidency.com doesn't get any simpler than that. All the information you need is there. I want to thank New York Museum of Art, and Linda Harrison for, supporting the residency, helping, get the word out. Creating this platform for us to have a conversation with these two fantastic artists. And, I'm really excited about the future. When it comes to collaboration, I'm always like more and more and more. I would encourage everyone here. I'm sure if you're here, you're on Newark Museum of Art's mailing list. You must be, right? How else would you have found out about this? And you should also follow them on social media. I can't wait to get back to the States and see Saya Wolfolk's exhibition at Newark Museum in September. It's on view now, but I won't be back there until September. I think they just dropped their summer programming link in the chat. That's all for me and my wordy self for the day. So I'm going to hand it back over to New York Museum of Art for any closing words. But again, thank you all for your support. Thank you, Nadia and Lynn, for being so generous with your time. And yeah, that's it for me. Oh, Trish, you're muted.
Well, that was so fantastic. Thank you all so much. Lynn and Nadia, thank you for letting us into a close look at your work and your experiences over there. It's totally amazing what you've accomplished and what you've absorbed in a short period of time. So I believe, as Dr. Exer said, that we dropped our link into the chat, but just as a reminder, we have a wonderful summer concert series that's underway, but have 8 concerts in the garden in collaboration with the New Jersey Symphony, and 2 great jazz exhibitions on view through August 21. So come on down. And yeah, we love all these ideas about more programming with our new friends, old friends, keeping it up with the Hayama Residency. So thanks everybody for coming out. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic evening. Stay safe.